spent 51 years learning how to make myself smaller in a room, but I never thought I'd learn how to vanish in plain sight. Sitting on a bench outside Dell's Diner on Route 9, with a cake carrier balanced on my knees and a cardigan I didn't need because the June evening had gone warmer than the forecast promised. My daughter had been very specific on the phone. "Wait at the diner, Mom. Not the church, not the country club, the diner. We'll swing by and grab you once the formal pictures are done. There won't be room in the limo for the whole portrait crowd, and you know how Garrett's family gets about timing." I'd said of course, like I always did, and I'd even thanked her, which is a thing I've done my whole life without noticing. Thanking people for the privilege of being inconvenienced. That was at 4. By 6, the diner had switched its sign from breakfast specials to the dinner crowd. By 7, a teenage busboy came out and asked if I was waiting on a to-go order. And I told him no, just a ride. And he gave me the kind of polite, careful nod young people give old women they've already decided are a little confused. By 8, the light went gold and then gray. By 9, the parking lot was half empty, and the smell of fryer grease had settled into my good blouse. The navy one with the pearl buttons that Frank used to say made me look like I was about to run a school board meeting. I had baked a lemon pound cake that morning, Bridget's favorite since she was 9. The one with the glaze I make thin, so it soaks all the way down into the crumb. I'd carried it on the bus across town in a hard plastic carrier because I no longer drive at night, and I told myself the whole way over that the cake was a small thing, a humble thing, but that it was mine, made with my own hands, and that there's a kind of love you can only say in butter and sugar. The cake sat next to me on the bench like a dog nobody had come to claim. I want to be honest about something, because if I'm going to tell this the way it really happened, I can't pretty it up. For the first 3 hours, I made excuses. The photographer ran long. The reception started late. Garrett's mother probably commandeered the limo. Bridget's phone probably died. She's always letting it die. I used to keep a charger in my purse just for her. I built a whole scaffolding of reasons, each one more generous than the last, because the alternative was a thing I wasn't ready to hold. It was the bus that finally took the scaffolding down. The last city bus on the Route 9 line came through a little after 10, brakes sighing, the inside of it lit up bright and empty. I'd half stood out of habit the way your body moves toward a thing that's leaving. It didn't stop for me because I hadn't flagged it, and I watched its red taillights shrink down the road, and somewhere in my chest a latch I didn't know I had quietly closed. Being late and being left are two different things. I sat there a long time learning the difference. I didn't cry on that bench. I want that on the record, too. I have cried plenty in my life, over Frank's casket and over a robin that flew into our picture window when I was 30, and over nothing at all, some Tuesday afternoons, but I did not cry outside Dell's Diner. I picked up the cake carrier and I walked the 1.25 miles home in my flat funeral shoes because I'd worn those instead of heels, knowing my feet. And I let myself in the side door. And I set the cake on the counter where it sat untouched for 2 days until it dried out, and I fed it to the birds. I'm 73. I was a labor and delivery nurse for 31 years at the county hospital. I caught more babies than I can count, held the legs of more frightened first-time mothers than I could name, and I retired with a pension that is not lavish but is honest, the way a thing you earned is honest. When Frank passed 11 years ago, there was a life insurance policy. Modest. And the year after that, I sold the back acreage of my family's farm to a man who wanted to put up a storage facility. And I put most of that money away and quietly spent the rest of it on my daughter without ever once telling her how much there was, because I never wanted her to love me for it. I tell you all this now plainly because later it will matter, and because I am tired of women like me being painted as both penniless and generous as if those two things make a fairy tale. I had money. I gave it away on purpose. Both of those are true. When I got home that night, I plugged in my phone, which had in fact died, and the screen lit up with a string of notifications, and one of them was a photo. Garrett's younger sister had posted it. A long table under a tent strung with little white bulbs, the whole laughing crowd of them, Bridget glowing in her ivory dress with her hand on Garrett's shoulder, Garrett's parents, Garrett's brothers, the cousins, Bridget's friends from her sorority days, the neighbors from her cul-de-sac, the woman who does her hair. The caption said, "Our whole world in one place. Love you all." I read it maybe a dozen times. I zoomed in until the faces blurred, looking for a chair that had been saved, an empty place setting, some sign that I had been planned for and then forgotten. There wasn't one. There was no gap where I should have been. The table had been set for exactly the number of people who were sitting at it, and I was not a person they had forgotten to count. I was a person they had counted and then subtracted. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark for a while after that. Then I did something I'm not proud of and not ashamed of either. I went to the hall table where I'd left the gift I brought to the diner along with the cake. I'd taken it down again, you see, brought it home, this thing I'd made, and I unwrapped it. It was a quilt. I'd been sewing it in secret for almost a year, hand-piecing it from squares cut out of Bridget's childhood, her first communion dress. The flannel from her toddler pajamas, the ones with the moons. A scrap of the prom gown I'd taken in twice and let out once. Frank's old work shirt, the soft blue one she used to steal to sleep in after he died. I'd quilted around the edges by hand because my machine doesn't do the fine work anymore, and the binding had taken me 3 weekends, and I had imagined, God help me, that she might unfold it at some quiet moment after the wedding and understand that her whole life had been held in my 2 hands the entire time. I looked at it under the kitchen light, square by square, the way you might look at a photo album you're about to give away. And then I folded it back into its tissue and I carried it out to the garage and I set it on the high shelf behind the Christmas boxes where I would not have to see it. I didn't throw it away. I want to be clear about that. I almost did, and standing over the trash bin with it, I understood something about myself. That even at the very bottom of a night like that, I could not throw away a year of my own work, just to match the size of her cruelty. That was the first thing I learned. I would not become small to keep up with her. I didn't sleep. Around 3, I got up and made tea and didn't drink it. Around 4, I sat down with a legal pad and I started writing, but not what you'd think. I didn't write the warm things, the birthday cakes, and the school plays. I wrote the other list. The time she came home from college and asked me to stay in the kitchen while her boyfriend's parents toured the house, because the living room had my crocheted afghans on the couch, and she said it looked like a craft fair threw up in there. The $4,000 for the real estate course she never finished, that she promised to pay back in installments and then never mentioned again, and that I never asked about because asking felt like accusing. The Christmas she gave me a gift card to a store 40 minutes away and a hug that lasted exactly as long as the photo took. The way, for the last decade, every phone call had started with a problem and ended with a request, and never once in between had she asked me how I was sleeping, whether my knee was holding up, if I was lonely in this house that still smelled faintly like her father. I filled 3 pages, and then, this is the part I didn't expect. I turned the legal pad over and I made myself write the other list too. Because I am a fair woman and I was raised to tell the truth even against my own grief. I wrote about the winter she had pneumonia at 6 and I slept upright in the rocker for 4 nights holding her so she could breathe. I wrote about the science fair volcano we built at midnight with baking soda all over the linoleum. I wrote about the night Frank died and Bridget, 26 and pregnant with Tess and terrified, had crawled into my bed and held onto my wrist all night like a little girl, like the world might pull me out from under her if she let go. I had been her home once. There was a time when I was the safest place she knew, and I sat there at 4 in the morning with 2 lists in front of me, one of wounds and one of love, and I understood that both of them were true, and that the second one did not cancel the first. That's the thing nobody tells you. The good years don't pay off the debt of the bad ones. They just sit there beside them, both real, both yours to carry. The first text came at noon the next day. Hi, Mom. Hope you got home okay. So sorry about the mix-up with the ride. Everything ran so late and Garrett's folks had us doing toasts forever. Let's do brunch soon. Love you. The mix-up. I read that word and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, which is the cold, clean feeling of seeing clearly. There had been no mix-up. A mix-up is when 2 people misunderstand each other. I had understood perfectly. I had understood that I was to wait at a diner like a parcel for pickup. And I had waited, and no one had come. And the reason no one had come was sitting right there in the photo under a tent full of lights. I did not match the wedding she wanted to be seen having. I didn't answer the text. I made toast instead, dry because my stomach wasn't in the mood for kindness, And then I got dressed in my church clothes, the gray ones, and I took the bus downtown to the credit union. The young man at the counter had a tie that didn't quite reach his belt, and the smooth, untroubled face of a person who has never once been left anywhere. I told him I wanted to review every automatic payment going out of my accounts, and his fingers went still on the keyboard for a second, because I think a woman my age asking that question always means something to a person who's been trained to watch for it. He printed it out for me, 3 pages at it. I sat in the little glass room they keep for these conversations, and I read down the list the way you'd read a charge sheet. There was the recurring transfer toward the second mortgage on Bridget and Garrett's house, the one I'd co-signed, because the bank wouldn't take Garrett's credit alone. There was Tess's private tutoring, $200 a month, which I was glad to pay because Tess is the one bright window in this whole story, and I'd have paid double. There was a standing payment for the dog's veterinary plan, a French bulldog named Biscuit, that I have met exactly once and that, I am told, is allergic to nearly everything in the natural world. There was Garrett's dental work, the implants, which I had agreed to cover the spring before last when Bridget cried on my porch about how embarrassed he was at his sales job with a gap in his smile. There was a salon membership in Bridget's name. There was a wine club. There was, scheduled for the following Friday, a payment of $2,200 toward something the wedding planner had labeled, discreetly, honeymoon balance. I sat there and I added it up in my head, and it came to more in a month than my own mortgage and groceries combined. And I want to tell you that I felt fury, but I didn't, not right then. What I felt was a kind of tired wonder. All of this, and still not enough to be worth a seat at the table. All of this love poured into a vessel that turned out to have a hole in the bottom of it. I'd been refilling for 10 years without ever once asking why it never got full. The young man came back and asked if I'd like to make any changes, and I looked at him, that smooth, easy face, and I thought of his mother somewhere probably keeping his favorite cereal in the pantry, and I said yes, I want everything stopped. Everything except 2 things. Keep my granddaughter's tutoring, and keep the monthly donation to the women's shelter on Pine, the one I've given to since 1989. Everything else, today. He hesitated over the mortgage. You're a cosigner, ma'am, but the payments draw from your account. Stopping it could affect your daughter's credit. I told him I understood, and that from now on, my daughter would be responsible for the roof over my daughter's head, and that I would inform her myself so it wouldn't be a surprise to anyone but me, who had been surprised quite enough lately. I signed where he showed me. My hand shook a little, but the signature held. It's a strange thing to feel your whole self gather behind a pen. That afternoon, back home, Bridget called. I let it ring. She called again an hour later, and I let that ring too. And I sat on my porch with iced tea and watched my neighbor across the street teach her grown daughter to back a little trailer down the driveway. The two of them laughing, the daughter leaning out the window, the mother waving her hands. And I thought about how some people would just have that easy belonging, and how you can't make it and you can't buy it, and Lord knows I had tried to buy it for a decade. The voicemail she left that night said, "Mom, I just saw Garrett's dental payment didn't go through. The office called. And the mortgage company sent something weird. Are you okay? Did something happen with your accounts? Please call me, I'm worried. We can talk about whatever this is. Are you okay?" She got there eventually in the voicemail, but she got there after the dental office and after the mortgage company, and a person's heart always shows you what it checked first. The next morning a real letter came, which almost never happens anymore. Plain white envelope, my name in a young, uncertain hand. No return address. I knew before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet torn from a school notebook, the ink smudged where a hand had dragged across it. "Grandma," it said. "I don't really know what's going on, but Mom is really upset and crying, and I heard her say you're mad. I'm sorry if something happened at the wedding. I looked for you at the reception, and Mom said you weren't feeling good and went home. Is that true? I miss making lemon cake with you. Can I come over sometime? I love you, Tess." I sat down at the kitchen table and read it 3 times, and that's when I cried, finally, 4 days late, big and silent, into a dish towel, because there it was. The child had looked for me. They had told her I was sick and had gone home. A clean little lie folded into a clean little napkin. And still, the 14-year-old, in the middle of all of it, had thought to find a stamp and an envelope and to ask the one question none of the adults had asked me straight. Is that true? I wrote her back that afternoon on a note card. I told her I wasn't sick, just tired, that grown-ups have complicated days and that none of it was hers to carry. I told her the kitchen missed her and that the bowls still needed licking and that she could come any Saturday she liked, no permission needed from me, ever. I signed it from the woman who has always been glad to see you, and I walked it down to the corner box and raised the little red flag and felt, for the first time in days, that I had done something true. Bridget came in person on a Thursday. I saw her car from the window before she knocked in the house she grew up in, which told me something about where we were now. She had a grocery bag in her hand, the way you'd hold a white flag, and when I opened the door, she held it up between us like an offering. Chamomile tea, scones from the bakery she used to roll her eyes at, a gardening magazine with a sticky note that said "Thought of you." "Mom," she said, "can we talk?" I didn't open the door any wider. I asked her why she was there. She said she wanted to fix things, that everything was bouncing, that she'd had to call Tess's school and stall on a payment, that she didn't understand why I was doing this to her. I held on to the door frame and I said, "All right, come in and say what you need to say." She sat at the kitchen table, my table, and she set the bag down and didn't touch it again. She looked around the room like a woman visiting a place she used to know, and her eyes caught on the little cross stitch by the window that Tess had made me. The one that says a house is whoever's glad you're home. And she flinched, just slightly, the way you do when a thing is too close to true. "You changed the will," she said. "Mr. Whitfield's office sent something. I hadn't yet, but I'd called him that morning to start, and word travels fast in a small town through the wrong wires, and I decided not to correct her because she wasn't wrong about where I was headed. I told her the truth instead. I told her I had spent the last decade keeping her household afloat. The mortgage, the dental work, the tutoring, the dog, the wine club, the honeymoon, I would now not be paying for, and that I had done it gladly, mostly, the way you keep doing a thing because stopping feels like a kind of dying, and that I had done it believing that being needed was the same as being loved, because it was the only currency I still seemed to have with her. She said, "That's not fair." "I never asked you to. You never had to ask," I said. "That's not fair. I never asked you. To you. You never had to ask," I said. "That's the part I'm done with. You let me. You let me right up until the morning of your wedding, when you let me wait at a diner, like a coat you forgot to grab on the way out." Her face did a thing then that I will remember the rest of my life. It came apart just for a second, and underneath the apology she'd rehearsed in the car was something raw, and it said before she could stop it, I was embarrassed. We sat in that for a while. Embarrassed of what, I finally asked, though I knew. "Of the house," she said, looking at the table. "The Afghans. Your clothes. Garrett's family. It's a different world, Mom, and I just thought you wouldn't be comfortable. You wouldn't know anyone. You'd be standing in the corner the whole night, and I'd be worried about you, and I told myself I was protecting you. You weren't protecting me," I said. "You were hiding me. There's a difference, and you've always been able to feel a difference when it suits you." She started to cry then, the real way, not the way she cried when she wanted something. And I'll tell you, the old me would have crossed the kitchen and held her. My arms ached too. 50 years of muscle memory wanted to get up and make it stop. But I stayed in my chair and I let her cry, and I discovered that you can love someone with your whole chest and still keep your seat. Nobody had ever told me that was allowed. "I'm sorry," she said. "I am. I didn't know it would. I didn't think about the bus, about how long. I just got swept up and then it was over. And I felt so guilty I couldn't even." "I know," I said. And I did know. I think she was sorry. I think she's the kind of person who is genuinely sorry the moment the consequences arrive, and not 1 second before. And that is a real kind of sorry. It just isn't the kind you can build a roof on. "I'm not angry," I told her. That surprised me as I said it, because it was true. I told her I wasn't doing any of this to punish her. I told her I was doing it because for the first time in years I could see clearly, and what I saw was that I had taught her to treat me like utility. Turn the tap, the water comes, and that I could not blame the faucet for what the plumber built. I told her the payments were done. The mortgage was hers now. I told her she was welcome in my home, to visit, to sit at this table, to eat my cooking, but that she was not welcome to manage me, edit me, or store me out of sight until I was useful again. "What does that even mean?" she said. "Where does that leave us?" "It leaves us at the beginning," I said. "You'll have to learn who I am now, not who I was when you needed me. Those are different women, and you only ever met the first one." She left with the grocery bag still on the table. She tried to take it back, fumbling, and I told her to leave it, that I'd enjoy the scones, and something about that small permission undid her more than anything else had. She stood on the porch a moment and said, "Tess talks about you all the time." And I said, "Tess talks about you all the time." And I said, "I know." She still looks at me. And I shut the door, not hard, just all the way you close a door when you've decided the conversation is over, and not when you're trying to make a point with it. I went to see Mr. Whitfield the following week and finished what I'd started. I left the house to myself free and clear, retitled in my own name with no one's signature tangled up in it but mine. I set up a trust for Tess, not just a college fund, a real trust, with a portion she could reach at 18, and I wrote her into it not as my granddaughter but, in the language the lawyer let me use, as the person in this family who never once made me feel like furniture. I left a small sum to the shelter on Pine, and I left Bridget the quilt. I had Mr. Whitfield write it in plain to my daughter, the quilt in the garage, made from the pieces of her childhood, in the hope that someday she'll be quiet enough to understand what it cost to make and what it cost to keep. Mr. Whitfield is an old man with a half-dead fern in his window, and a way of looking at you over his glasses. When we finished, he capped his pen and said, "Maureen, I do more of these than you'd think." Parents written off, then writing back. He paused. "I always wished they'd done it before they were broken." I told him I wasn't broken. He smiled and said, "No, I can see that. You're just finally done, pretending you were unbreakable." Tess came the first Saturday after the will was signed. She didn't call ahead. She just turned up at the side door with her backpack and her hair a glorious mess that her mother would never have allowed. And she said, "I came for cake," and I handed her the wooden spoon without a word, the way I used to. And she went straight to the canister for the flour, like no time had passed at all. We don't talk about her mother much. Sometimes she lets a thing slip, a slammed door, a tense dinner, her mother snapping when Tess asks a question she doesn't want to answer, and I just nod and keep stirring because a 14-year-old doesn't need her grandmother stacking the deck against her own mother. But one afternoon, with the kitchen thick with lemon and butter, she stopped scraping the bowl and said, real quiet, "Did Mom really leave you at a diner?" I weighed it. You don't lie to a child who's already smelled the smoke. "Yes," I said, "she did. But people can be both. Your mother loves you with everything she's got, and she still left me there. Both of those are true, and you're old enough to start holding two true things at once." Tess thought about that the way she thinks about everything, with her whole face. Then she said, "I'm not going to do that to you." "I know it," I told her. "That's why the bowl is yours. She comes twice a month now. She bakes on her own mostly. She's better at the glaze than I ever was. She found my old box of costume jewelry and wears 4 bracelets at once, which is a thing she did at 6 and apparently still does at 14. And I have decided some parts of a person are load-bearing and shouldn't be remodeled. Bridget calls now and then. Last month she called and didn't ask for money. First time in, I can't remember how long. She just called to tell me Tess had gotten an A on a paper about a nurse during the war, and that the teacher had read it out loud, and that Tess had said at dinner she might want to do medicine. "I think she gets that from you," Bridget said, careful, like a person stepping on river ice. I didn't say I hope so, I just said, "Good." And I think we both heard everything that lived inside that one small word. We're building something now, she and I, but it's smaller and slower and it weighs almost nothing, which is the point. A phone call. A Sunday she drops Tess off and stays for 1 cup of coffee at the door, not the table, not yet, and asks me how my knee is before she asks me anything else, because I think someone finally taught her the order matters, or maybe I did by going quiet until she figured it out. She has not asked me to forgive her, and I have not offered. And there is something honest in that we're both protecting. My friend Estelle, who has known me since we were girls and who would have cut Bridget off 20 years ago and never lost a night's sleep, came by when the dust had settled and looked around my kitchen and said, "You put the hammer down." I told her it wasn't a hammer, it was a set of keys. I just stopped unlocking the same doors for the same people and calling it love. She laughed her big rolling laugh and said, "Well, it's about time. You spent so long being Bridget's mother and Frank's wife, and the nice nurse from the 3rd floor, that you packed Maureen away somewhere with the good china." And the awful thing was, she was exactly right, and the wonderful thing was, she was exactly right, and I told her so, and she ate 3 of Bridget's scones and didn't apologize for any of them. I planted bulbs last Sunday. Tulips and crocuses and a row of daffodils along the front walk, things that come up at different times, so the yard keeps surprising you all spring instead of showing its whole hand at once. My knees complained and my hands shook on the trowel, but I got them all in the ground, and a woman walking her dog slowed down and said, "That's going to be a pretty sight come April." It already is, I told her, and I meant the kneeling in my own dirt as much as anything that would bloom from it. The house is quiet these days, but it's a different quiet than the one I waited inside of all those years. That old quiet was a held breath. This one is just air. No one editing me, no one asking me to fold my edges in, no one captioning my life from across a 10 strung with somebody else's lights. When I pass the mirror in a hall now, I sometimes stop, not to fix anything, but just to look. Because after a long time away, I have started recognizing the woman in it again. She isn't bitter, and she isn't waiting, and she isn't quiet because anyone told her to be. She's quiet because she finally has nothing left to prove, and that is the most peaceful sound I know. So if you're sitting somewhere right now on a bench outside some diner, holding a cake you made with your own two hands, waiting on a car that you are slowly starting to understand is not coming, stand up, take your cake, walk home with your back straight even if your feet hurt. You were never the thing they forgot to load into the limo. You were the whole reason there was ever anything worth celebrating, and the day they figure that out, they'll find you exactly where you've always been. Only this time you'll be the one deciding whether to open the door